Social comparison is the trap. Imagine a rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year. By most standards, he's rich. But suppose he plays on the same team as Mike Trout, who has $35.8 million a year. Compared to him, the rookie feels broke. Mike Trout might look at Warren Buffett, who made $3.5 billion in 2018. And even Buffett could look at Jeff Bezos, whose net worth rose by $24 billion that same year. More per hour than the baseball player earned in a full year. That is one lesson from the Psychology of Money book. Let's go through the complete summary. 2008, as Goldman Sachs faced the wrath of the financial crisis, Warren Buffett planned to invest $5 billion to help the bank survive. Rajat Gupta, a retired millionaire and Goldman board member, learned about the deal before it became public. Knowing it would send Goldman stock soaring, he immediately bought 175,000 shares and made a quick $1 million. He went to prison for insider trading. His career and reputation were permanently destroyed. Gupta had everything: immense wealth, prestige, power, freedom. And he threw it all away because he wanted more. He had no sense of enough. We need to remember a few things. Number one, the hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving. If your expectations rise as your results improve, there's no point in striving for more, because you'll never feel like you've arrived. It becomes dangerous when the taste of having more money, more power, more status, increases ambition faster than satisfaction. As the saying goes, happiness equals results minus expectations. The only way to win is not to play, to accept that you might already have enough, even if it's less than what others have. There are things never worth risking, no matter the potential reward. Your reputation is invaluable. Your freedom and independence are invaluable. Your family and friends are invaluable. Being loved by the people you love is invaluable. Your happiness is invaluable. And your best shot at keeping those things is knowing when it's time to stop taking risks that might destroy them. It's knowing when you have enough. You need to define what enough means to you. Maybe it's working 3 days a week so you can spend more time with your kids. Maybe it's being able to take your parents to any restaurant they want. Maybe it's simply having enough money to cover your family's medical bills. Everyone has their own version of enough. What matters is knowing yours, because that's when you stop chasing things you don't truly want. Number 2, luck and risk. Luck and risk are siblings. They both reflect the reality that outcomes in life are often shaped by forces beyond individual effort. Years ago, the author asked economist Robert Shiller, a Nobel Prize winner, what he wished we could better understand about investing. His answer: the exact role of luck in successful outcomes. No one seriously believes that luck plays no role in financial success. But because luck is difficult to measure, and because it feels rude to imply someone's success might be due to it, we often ignore it altogether. But acknowledging luck and risk can change the way you think about success and failure in a healthy way. Here are 2 simple takeaways. Be careful who you praise and admire. Be careful who you criticize or look down on. Some people are born into families that prioritize education, others are not. Some grow up in thriving economies that encourage entrepreneurship. Others are raised in war zones or poverty. Not all success is the result of hard work. Not all poverty is the result of laziness. Keep that in mind when judging others and yourself. As Scott Galloway puts it, nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. This is why it's often wiser to focus less on individuals and more on broad patterns. Case studies of specific people, especially billionaires, CEOs, or massive failures, tend to be misleading. Their extreme outcomes, often shaped by equally extreme levels of luck or risk. The more exceptional the story, the less applicable it might be to your own life. You'll get closer to practical, actionable insights by looking for common patterns of success and failure. Because the more common the pattern, the more likely it is that you can apply it to your own journey. No one's crazy. Your personal experience with money might make up just 1/1000% of everything that's ever happened in the world, but it probably shapes about 80% of how you think the world works. Economists have found that people's lifetime investment decisions are deeply influenced by the economic conditions they experienced during their own generation, especially in early adulthood. Take stocks, for example. If you were born in 1970, the S&P 500 grew nearly tenfold, adjusted for inflation, during your teens and 20s. That's an incredible return. But if you were born in 1950, the market went virtually nowhere in real terms during that same period of your life. Two people, separated only by the year they were born, can go through life with completely different views of how the stock market works. Every financial decision people make is justified by taking the information they have at the moment and plugging it into their unique mental model of how the world works. They might be misinformed. They might have incomplete information. They might fall for persuasive marketing. They might misjudge the consequences of their actions. But every financial decision makes sense to the person making it, at least in that moment. It checks the boxes they believe need to be checked. They tell themselves a story about what they're doing and why. And that story is shaped by their own unique experiences. Take a simple example: lottery tickets. Americans spend more on lottery tickets than they do on movies, video games, music, sporting events, and books combined. And who buys them? Mostly lower-income households. The lowest-income households in the U.S., on average, spend $412 a year on lottery tickets, 4 times as much as the highest-income households. At the same time, about 40% of Americans say they couldn't come up with $400 in an emergency, which means the people spending $400 a year on lottery tickets are often the same people who say they couldn't cover a $400 emergency. They're sacrificing their safety net for a 1 in a million shot at hitting it big. That might seem crazy to me. It probably seems crazy to you too. But I'm not in the lowest income group, and chances are you're not either. So it's hard, maybe impossible, for us to fully understand the subconscious reasoning behind those decisions. But you can imagine it going something like this. We live paycheck to paycheck. Saving feels impossible. Our wages aren't going up. We can't afford vacations, new cars, health insurance, or a safe neighborhood. Sending our kids to college means a mountain of debt. But buying a lottery ticket? That's the one moment we get to hold a tangible dream in our hands. Number 4, confounding compounding. $81.5 billion of Warren Buffett's $84.5 billion net worth came after his 65th birthday. Consider this thought experiment. Buffett began serious investing when he was just 10 years old. By the time he was 30, his net worth was $1 million, or $9.3 million adjusted for inflation. But what if he was more typical? Spending his teens and 20s exploring the world and finding his passion, with a net worth of just $25,000 at age 30. Let's say he still earned his extraordinary investment returns, about 22% annually, but retired at age 60 to play golf and spend time with his grandkids. What would his net worth be today? Not $84.5 billion. Around $11.9 million. That's 99.9% less than his actual net worth. His skill is investing, but his secret is time. That's how compounding works. Think about it another way. Buffett is the richest investor of all time. But he's not necessarily the greatest, at least not when measured by average annual returns. Jim Simons, head of the hedge fund Renaissance Technologies, has compounded money at 66% annually since 1988. No one comes close to this record. Buffett's annualized return is roughly 22%, about a third of Simons' rate. Yet Simons' net worth today is about $21 billion, which is, and I know this sounds crazy given the numbers, 75% less than Buffett's net worth. Why the difference if Simons is such a better investor? Because Simons didn't find his investment stride until he was 50 years old. He's had less than half as many years to compound as Buffett. If Simons had earned his 66% annual return for the full 70 years Buffett has been investing, he would be worth, please hold your breath, 63 quintillion, 900 quadrillion, 781 trillion, 780 billion, 748 million, $160,000. Good investing isn't necessarily about chasing the highest returns. The highest returns tend to be one-off hits that can't be repeated. It's about earning pretty good returns consistently, returns you can stick with and repeat over the longest possible period of time. That's when compounding really runs wild. Number 5. Getting wealthy versus staying wealthy. Good investing is not necessarily about making good decisions. It's about consistently not screwing up. Getting money requires taking risks, being optimistic, and putting yourself out there. But keeping money requires the opposite of taking risk. It requires humility and fear that what you've made can be taken away from you just as fast. It requires frugality and an acceptance that at least some of what you've made is attributable to luck. So past success can't be relied upon to repeat indefinitely. Applying the survival mindset to the real world comes down to appreciating 3 things. You need to be able to stick around long enough for compounding to work wonders. Compounding only works if you can give an asset years and years to grow. It's like planting oak trees. A year of growth will never show much progress. 10 years can make meaningful difference, and 50 years can create something absolutely extraordinary. Planning is important, but the most important part of every plan is to plan on the plan not going according to plan. If there's enough room for error in your savings rate that you can say, it'd be great if the market returns 8% a year over the next 30 years, but if it only does 4% a year, I'll still be okay. Room for error, often called margin of safety, is one of the most underappreciated forces in finance. It comes in many forms: a frugal budget, flexible thinking, and a loose timeline. Anything that lets you live happily with a range of outcomes. It's different from being conservative. Conservative is avoiding a certain level of risk. Margin of safety is raising the odds of success at a given level of risk by increasing your chances of survival. Its magic is that the higher your margin of safety, the smaller your edge needs to be to have a favorable outcome. A barbelled personality, optimistic about the future, but paranoid about what will prevent you from getting the future, is vital. Economies, markets, and careers often follow a similar path: growth amid loss. Here's how the U.S. economy performed over the last 170 years. But do you know what happened during this period? Where do we begin? Roughly 99.9% of all companies that were created went out of business. 33 recessions lasted a cumulative 48 years. The number of forecasters who predicted any of those recessions rounds to 0. Stocks lost a third of their value at least 12 times. The words economic pessimism appeared in newspapers at least 29,000 times, according to Google. Our standard of living increased 20-fold in these 170 years. But barely a day went by that lacked tangible reasons for pessimism. A mindset that can be paranoid and optimistic at the same time is hard to maintain, because seeing things as black or white takes less effort than accepting nuance. But you need short-term paranoia to keep you alive long enough to exploit long-term optimism. Nothing is free. Say you want a new car. It costs $30,000. You have 3 options: pay $30,000 for it, find a cheaper used one, or steal it. In this case, 99% of people know to avoid the third option, because the consequences of stealing a car outweigh the upside. Investing is similar to buying a car. You have a few options. You can pay the price, accepting volatility and upheaval. Or you can find an asset with less uncertainty and a lower payoff, the equivalent of a used car. Or you can attempt the equivalent of Grand Theft Auto. Try to get the return while avoiding the volatility that comes with it. Many people in investing choose the third option. Like a car thief, though well-meaning and law-abiding, they devise tricks and strategies to get the return without paying the price. They trade in and out. They attempt to sell before the next recession and buy before the next boom. If you view volatility as a fee, things look different. Disneyland tickets cost $100. But you get an awesome day with your kids you'll never forget. In 1 year, more than 18 million people thought that fee was worth paying. Few saw the $100 as a punishment or a fine. The worthwhile trade-off of a fee is obvious when it's clear what you're paying for. It's the same with investing, where volatility is almost always a fee, not a fine. Market returns are never free and never will be. They demand that you pay a price, like any other product. You're not forced to pay this fee, just like you're not forced to go to Disneyland. You can go to the local county fair where tickets might be $10, or stay home for free. You might still have a good time, but you usually get what you pay for. Same with markets. The volatility uncertainty fee, the price of returns, is the cost of admission to get returns greater than those from low-fee parks like cash and bonds. Room for error. Benjamin Graham is known for his concept of margin of safety, the idea that we don't have to view the world in black and white, as either predictable or a total crapshoot. The gray area, pursuing outcomes where a wide range of results are acceptable, is often the smartest path forward. Yet people frequently underestimate the need for room for error in almost everything involving money. Stock analysts give clients price targets, not price ranges. Economic forecasters issue precise predictions, rarely offering broad probabilities. And pundits who speak in unshakable certainties tend to gain larger followings than those who admit, "We can't know for sure," and speak in probabilities. Room for error is both underappreciated and misunderstood. It's often seen as a conservative hedge used by those who are timid or uncertain. But in reality, when applied correctly, it's a powerful form of risk management that enables boldness. Room for error allows you to endure a wide range of potential outcomes, and endurance is what gives you the chance to stick around long enough for the odds to eventually tilt in your favor. The biggest gains tend to be rare, either because they don't happen often or because they take years to compound. There are a few key areas where investors should consciously build in room for error. One is volatility. Can you withstand a 30% decline in your assets? On paper, maybe yes. You may still be able to pay your bills and stay cash flow positive. But what about mentally? It's easy to underestimate the emotional toll of such a loss. A 30% drawdown can shake your confidence just when opportunity is greatest. You, or your spouse, might decide it's time for a new plan, or even a new career. I know several investors who quit after large losses simply because they were exhausted, physically and emotionally exhausted. Another is retirement planning. Historical data shows that the U.S. stock market has returned an average of 6.8% annually after inflation since the 1870s. That's a reasonable first approximation to use when projecting returns on a diversified portfolio. Based on that assumption, you can back into how much you need to save each month to hit your target retirement number. But what if future returns are lower? Or what if the long-term average holds true, but your personal retirement date falls in the middle of a brutal bear market like 2009? The answer to those what-ifs is sobering. You may not be able to retire the way you planned. That can be disastrous. The solution is simple. Bake in room for error when estimating your future returns. This is more art than science. The author, for example, assumes the returns he earns over his lifetime will be 1/3 lower than the historical average. That means he saves more than he would if he assumed the future would mirror the past. That's margin of safety. Could the future be worse than a 1/3 shortfall? Of course, but no margin of safety can offer a 100% guarantee. A 1/3 buffer is enough to sleep well at night. And if the future turns out as good or better than the past, you'll be pleasantly surprised. As Charlie Munger once said, the best way to achieve felicity is to aim low. 11. Reasonable, rational. Do not aim to be coldly rational when making financial decisions. Aim to just be pretty reasonable. Reasonable is more realistic, and you have a better chance of sticking with it for the long run, which is what matters most when managing money. Academic finance is devoted to finding the mathematically optimal investment strategies. Theory is that, in the real world, people do not want the mathematically optimal strategy. They want the strategy that maximizes how well they sleep at night. Two things are important. One is that minimizing future regret is hard to rationalize on paper, but easy to justify in real life. A rational investor makes decisions based on numeric facts. A reasonable investor makes them in a conference room surrounded by coworkers. You want to think highly of you, with a spouse you don't want to let down, or judged against the silly but realistic competitors that are your brother-in-law, your neighbor, and your own personal doubts. Investing has a social component that's often ignored when viewed through a strictly financial lens. What's often overlooked in finance is that something can be technically true, but contextually nonsense. In 2008, a pair of researchers from Yale published a study arguing young savers should supercharge their retirement accounts using a 2-to-1 margin $2 of debt for every dollar of their own money when buying stocks. Even if using leverage left you wiped out when you were young, the researchers showed savers would still be better off in the long run, so long as they picked themselves back up, followed the plan, and kept saving in a 2-to-1 leveraged account the day after being wiped out. The math works on paper. It's a rational strategy. But it's almost absurdly unreasonable. No normal person could watch 100% of their retirement account evaporate and be so unfazed that they can carry on with the strategy undeterred. They'd quit, look for different options, and perhaps sue their financial advisor. The researchers argued that when using their strategy, the expected retirement wealth is 90% higher compared to life cycle funds. It is also 100% less reasonable. Surprise! Stanford professor Scott Sagan once said, "Things that have never happened before happen all the time." It's wise to have a deep appreciation for economic and investing history. History helps us calibrate expectations, understand where people tend to go wrong, and offers a rough guide to what tends to work. But it is not, in any way, a map of the future. A trap many investors fall into is what I call the historians as prophets fallacy, an over-reliance on past data as a signal for future conditions in a field where innovation and change are the lifeblood of progress. You can't blame investors for this. If you view investing as a hard science, history should be a perfect guide to the future. Geologists can look at billions of years of historical data and form models of how the Earth behaves. But investing is not a hard science. It's a massive group of people making imperfect decisions with limited information about things that will have a massive impact on their well-being. Decisions that can make smart people nervous, greedy, and paranoid. Richard Feynman, the great physicist, once said, "Imagine how much harder physics would be if electrons had feelings." Well, investors have feelings. Quite a few of them. That's why it's hard to predict what they'll do next based solely on what they did in the past. Imagine the last century without the Great Depression, World War II, the Manhattan Project, vaccines, antibiotics, ARPANET, September 11th, the fall of the Soviet Union. How many projects and events occurred in the 20th century? Billions, trillions, who knows? But those 8 alone impacted the world orders of magnitude more than most others. The problem is that we often use events like the Great Depression and World War II to guide our views of worst-case scenarios for future investment returns. But those record-setting events had no precedent when they occurred. So the forecaster who assumes the worst and best events of the past will match the worst and best events of the future is not following history. They're accidentally assuming that the history of unprecedented events doesn't apply to the future. 2. History can be a misleading guide to the future of the economy and stock market because it doesn't account for structural changes that are relevant to today's world. The S&P 500 did not include financial stocks until 1976. Today, financials make up 16% of the index. Technology stocks were virtually non-existent 50 years ago. Today, they comprise more than a fifth of the index. There's a common phrase in investing, usually used mockingly, that it's different this time. Historians are not prophets. You will change. Long-term financial planning is essential. But things change, both the world around you and your own goals and desires. It is one thing to say, "We don't know what the future holds." It's hard to make enduring long-term decisions when your view of what you'll want in the future is likely to shift. The end of history illusion is what psychologists call the tendency for people to be keenly aware of how much they've changed in the past, but to underestimate how much their personalities, desires, and goals are likely to change in the future. Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert shows that people from age 18 to 68 consistently underestimate how much they will change. At every stage of our life, we make decisions that will profoundly influence the lives of the people we're going to become. And then when we become those people, we're not always thrilled with the decisions we made. So young people pay good money to get tattoos removed that teenagers paid good money to get. Middle-aged people rush to divorce people who young adults rush to marry. There are 2 things to keep in mind when making what you think are long-term decisions. 1. Avoid the extremes of financial planning. Compounding works best when you can give a plan years or decades to grow. This is true not only for savings, but also for careers and relationships. Endurance is key. and one you consider our tendency to change who we are over time. Balance at every point in your life becomes a strategy to avoid future regret and encourage endurance. Aiming at every point in our working life to have moderate annual savings, moderate free time, no more than a moderate commute, and at least moderate time with your family increases the odds of being able to stick with a plan and avoid regret, more than if any one of those things falls to the extreme ends of the spectrum. 2. Accept the reality of changing your mind. Some of the most miserable workers I've met are people who stay loyal to a career only because it's the field they picked when deciding on a college major at age 18. When you accept the end of history illusion, you realize that the odds of picking a job when you're not old enough to drink and still enjoying it when you're old enough to qualify for Social Security are low. The trick is to accept the reality of change and move on as soon as possible. You and me. Investors often innocently take cues from other investors who are playing a different game than they are. Ask yourself, how much should you pay for Google stock today? The answer depends on who you are. Do you have a 30-year time horizon? Then the smart price to pay involves a sober analysis of Google's discounted cash flows over the next 30 years. Are you looking to cash out within 10 years? Then the price to pay depends on an analysis of the tech industry's potential over the next decade and whether Google's management can execute on its vision. Are you looking to sell within a year? Then pay attention to Google's current product sales cycles and whether we'll have a bear market. Are you a day trader? Then the smart price to pay is, who cares? Because you're just trying to squeeze a few bucks out of whatever happens between now and lunchtime, which can be accomplished at any price. When investors have different goals and time horizons, and they do, in every asset class, prices that look ridiculous to one person can make sense to another, because the factors those investors pay attention to are different goals and desires. There is no single right answer, just the answer that works for you. That is all of this book. Subscribe for more videos.